Hello everyone, my name is Arvid and today I want to show you how I rendered it in Arnold. We will be starting off in Maya. I will be showing you USD and MaterialX workflows using LookdevX. We will be showing you several other features using Maya, and then we will be hopping into Houdini as well to show you how we can render stuff in Arnold using Houdini as well. So now let's get right into this by adding in some USD assets here. The first thing that we want to do is open up the USD layer editor. It's a floating window. You can also dock it if you need to. But for now, we want to create a new stage from file and we want to point it to our USD file. I like to pick a asset here, which will bring our little asset into the stage. So we have our nice looking dinosaur here. It's a toy dinosaur and you can see it already brought in all the stuff. We have this USD file and this is kind of what we have. So what we want to do next is let's create some basic shaders. So what you can do here, you can right click, you can add a sublayer, will open up and you can kind of save it wherever you want it to save. We can do it under toy dinosaur. And we can say it's an MTL file. So we want to store the MTL within this USD file that we now just created. So essentially what we do, we load the geometry up here. This is pointing to a file on disk. And then we create a new USD file that will house all our material assignments and whatnot. So as you can see, this is now stored under MTL. And at the moment, we don't have anything, no materials assigned to it. So what we can do here, you can see we have all these several layers here. And if we want to create now an open PBR shader to this, which is the new standard in Maya or Arnold in general, we can then, let's say, go to the top thing, assign new material, and we can go to Arnold and we can find the open PBR surface. And you can see it will create this scope MTL, open PBR surface, and then it's the actual shader. And this is also assigned to our little guy here. To actually see it, let's create a light, skydome light. Let's pick some material. We want to go a file node and we want to browse to a file. And this is now pointing to my HDRI studio. And if I hit render now, we can open up the render view or render in the viewport. It's up to you. I always like the render view. It's a little bit easier to work with because you have more controls, I feel. And this is now our little open PBR. You can see by default now Arnold is denoising. So whenever you start the render, load a new session, hit render, Arnold will by default denoise your session. We are running on the CPU at the moment. So I want to change it to GPU because I have a pretty beefy one. I've got a 4090 in my system and I want to obviously use that. So I'm switching up to GPU. And for now, because I have a powerful GPU, I don't want to have any denoising for now. So we can go to imagers and we can just disable this guy. So now it will not denoise by default. Our minimum AI sample is 3. For GPU, you can push them up to 10. Usually you have also adaptive on maybe to 50, and then you can play with the threshold. So this would be a very basic GPU render setting. If you hit render now, you can see now this is a lot snappier, I feel, and it's cleaning up pretty quick as well. And as you know, this is now using our open PBR shader. So how do we change it? You can obviously go in here and see it over here on the right hand side, but the new and cool way of working is LookdevX. So you right click your shader, show on LookdevX. This will actually then open up a new graph editor and we hopped inside this container, and inside of this is actually our shader where you now can tweak everything as you see fit. So we can for now just close the USD editor. And if I now change my base color, you can see everything is updating as we go. And this is pretty powerful. And it's using obviously the new open PBR standard surface shader. And then you can obviously use all the Arnold nodes. You can bring in a new texture if you want to use a new image node, point that to your file. Let's see if we can find some textures. And these are now in sRGB space, and color space is sRGB, which is correct. And then we hook it up to our base color and now our textures are assigned. So that is very simple, very straightforward. And now if you want to save that USD file that we actually created, called with the underscore, you can open back up the USD layer editor or just hit Ctrl S. You can then right click, save edits, or hit that save button here. this is now saving this to the MTL USD file. And that is kind of the basic idea of how to work in LookdevX. And the cool thing now is, now that we have this USD file saved to disk, we can actually open it in any other application that supports USD. And then you can pull that in and have it working. But for now, let's work a little bit more on the LookDev and make this dinosaur as good as we can make it. All right, so now let's get into maybe adding some roughness on the specular. You can see at the moment, there's just no breakup really. And you can see at the front here, there's not too much going on, as I said. So what you can do, you can obviously create a new image node, type in everything, or you can just drag and drop from your texture paths. So you can, for instance, let's say I want to drop the roughness map, that creates an image node. Then roughness, we have probably, we want the normals as well. Drop that in here. So now we've got roughness and normals. We can set the color spaces. This one will be raw. And this one will be raw as well. And then let's go for the roughness. We just drop that into specular roughness like so. And we should now already get some breakup. You can already see on the nose here, there's definitely some breakup. That's perfect. And then for the normal map, we can just create a bump map from Arnold 2D. Sorry, that would be the normal actually. Normal from here. And then the input would be our texture. And then that would hook up into, and this would hook into geometry normal like that. And you can see now we got the bump map connected. And now we have the strength controls to adjust how much we want to see it and how little we want to see it. We can also, as usual, control the roughness maps using a range. That is also from the Arnold context like that. And we can just drop that in here like that. Let's see, hook it up again. And then let's connect that. So now we have the roughness connected. We can now control essentially how much we want it to be reflective or rough looking. So at the moment, the peaks, the valleys are rough, the peaks are reflective, and maybe that's the look we want to go for. We can also play with the texture obviously itself. If this is maybe too dark or whatever, you can quite easily just create a color correct under here. I think we also have the options to connect on drop. Actually not sure if we can hover to connect, but there are quite a few different options here. Now let's just connect it like that, go back to base color. So now we have in between, we do have a color correct node connected in between. As usual, you can also use backdrops and everything to create, more compelling layering. Shift B was it? I was just looking for the hotkey. Shift B, that's the one. Grouping, Shift B for this one. You can see you can quite easily organize that now. So LookdevX is actually extremely powerful in terms of making compounds and making a really good readable interface. All right, so now, as I said, we have the color correct node and we can now go into our color corrections. Let's say we want to add more saturation to this, maybe boost up the exposure of the texture a little bit, make it a little bit brighter. And yeah, I kind of like this, right? So we don't have any bump height maps. So we're just working with normal maps here, but I think I like it. And this, let's say, is now our dinosaur character, right? Can frame in, whatever, we can minimize this quick. And this is now what we got. And now let's go back to our USD layer editor and we can quite easily just save the edit. So everything that we did now, all the assignments, everything lives inside of this MTL USD file. So that's essentially one of the workflows you can do. There's obviously, depending on which pipelines you work with, the more granular you'll have to be. For instance, we could also create a light USD file that houses our light rigs, stuff like that. So that's all quite easily possible using this workflow. And now if we want to bring back the denoising, as usual, you can go to the Images tab, enable this, and now our image is denoised by default. You can see it's actually instantaneous, the denoising part, super quick, and you always get a clean image. I know I'm rendering probably on half res. We can go maybe double res, which then would be 1920 by 1080. And even that, you can see now is extremely quick to denoise, and you can always kind of see the final pixel result. So that has been hugely improved. It's very interactive now, so it's quite fun to deal with. Now that we have a shaded Dinosaur version in Maya, now let's have a look how we can actually work with this in another application, for instance, like Houdini, which fully supports Arnold as well. Now we are in Solaris, which is Houdini's USD stage, and you can see by here that we are working inside of that. And to load in a geo, you would load a sublayer, and this will now point to the same file that we have for our Maya scene file. And now you can see we have the same little dinosaur in here. Also, let's bring our dome light. That will be our same, that we have the same looks as well. And in Solaris, you kind of have a Hydra viewport, if I recall correctly. And under the perspective camera dropdown, you have the options of through which render engine essentially you want to look through it. So you've got Karma, which is Houdini's native render engine, and then you've got Arnold as well. If I click Arnold now, this will now compile everything for Arnold and then render what we see inside of that. You can see it will run the makeTX command, and then it will display our dinosaur rendered. And there you have it. This is now rendered in Arnold. At the moment, obviously, we don't have any shaders because we just loaded the geometry. And also we are running on the CPU at the moment. So you can hit D to open up the display options, and in here you have options to change kind of the viewport rendering system, and I want to switch it to GPU, so this will compile the shaders to GPU, and then you can set your AA samples. For GPU, you usually go high with the initial AAs, and then you can enable adaptive sampling if you feel like it. And this essentially is that. You can now see this is our little dinosaur rendered in Arnold in Houdini. We still have all these other gizmos. You can just hide them if you don't want to see them. We can also hide the wireframe. And this is kind of now the render. So what we want to do next is we want to bring in our shaders, right? So there's a simple way. You can just create another sublayer like that. That will then load in everything, hopefully. And you can see I'm pointing it to the USD file that we saved inside of Maya. And you can see in the hierarchy view here on the bottom left, there is now a new MTL option. And you can see we have all these different materials in here. Shaders, image nodes, all of that stuff. A couple of backdrops, that's probably won't be working. But either way, we have the shader now here. And then we have all the image nodes, and all these image nodes are pointing to the right files on disk. So that's pretty awesome. And I believe you can just drag this on your geo or on the geo at the top here, and it will create you the material assign. And you can see if I move this over, you can see that the OpenPBL surface has now been assigned to our little dinosaur. And if we render now, it should hopefully render everything as it is inside of Maya. So now if we hit Arnold, we can now see that we do have our dinosaur rendering just fine. And this just shows you how you can work between different applications and get still the same results. So that is pretty awesome. And again, you can now go back, for instance, back to Maya, make changes here. And you might be wondering, why am I showing this to you? The reason is, for instance, you work on a small project in a small team. Some people prefer to work in Houdini, some prefer to work in Maya, or it's a remote kind of situation. You have all these different variables. So this just shows you how you can actually work together on bigger projects. So if I do a hue shift, you can now see, I don't know, we're creating a blue-yellow variant of this. The moment I will be just saving over the same file. So it will ask me, hey, do you want to save both? I will this time save the Maya and the USD files like that. Then I'll stop the render. Then we head back to Houdini and we will reload the sublayer. And then we just start the render again, and it should then kind of match what we had in Maya. So this is kind of a super cool way of working together between different applications. And as you know, at the moment, we are just assigning an MTL file to a specific geometry based on what was done in Maya. So technically the user working on Houdini can't really change much on the shaders, right? Technically. But as it's USD, you have lots of control to actually dive into this stuff. So you have edit network, and there's this edit Arnold material. You can hook that in and then point it to the material, and then you can load it, and this will then load up the shader inside of here. So you can see now this pulled in the OpenPBR surface shader. At the moment, it does not bring in all the different file nodes that we at the moment can't work with, but you can still do certain tweaks to it. So I could, for instance, bring in the color correct node, right click this, edit primitive with new node. This will give me an override for this node. And now if I render, you can now see we have our dinosaur here, and I can, for instance, now change the hue shift, and then this allows me again to override what was done essentially with any of these given nodes. So there's quite the control ready to adjust existing material files. But what if we want to actually create our own shaders? Let's say we have two different persons working on two different variants, for instance. You could then create the material library. This is a node in Houdini Solaris that allows you to create material nodes. So there would be then the Arnold material builder, and this is then kind of the same as in LookdevX. You have your OpenPBR shader, create that, and now connect that like so, and we then can automatically assign them to the geometry to here. If I hit render now, you can now see that the PBR shader is assigned, the one that we just have created. And if I hop into here, enable GPU again, let's go to 10. This is now my dinosaur in here. And as we did before, we can now create our own kind of shading network in here. Now I just dragged and dropped the base color from my Explorer, and now I can hook it up, and then you can see it, we're already connecting. This is now a different variant. It's kind of purplish. And if we hit render now, let's see what we get. And after the TX conversion, this is now our base color. This is actually a 4K texture map. This is way high resolution than with the other ones we used. And now let's kind of recreate a very similar shading network. So I will again now be dropping in the textures. And we have our base color. We have our roughness maps. And we do have our normal maps. And yeah, we don't need the height maps for now. So I'm just dragging and dropping them in here. You can see we are getting these two maps. The normal map is in raw. We need to set this to scene referred, and this will, to scene referred and raw, linear, I mean. And then we also have the option here, the same way, set that to linear. This is using OpenDRT color workflow. So it's a little bit different than ACES, but it shouldn't matter. It's the same as I used in Maya at the moment. And now let's create the normal one. So this will be our normal map as we know it. Input, this will hook up to the geometry normal. Again, this should now trigger the TX generation. And you can see the normals are pretty high res, looks super detailed, which is awesome. And then we can do the same for the roughness. We can just drop that onto specular roughness. And again, this will do the TX. And then once that is done, we will have our roughness applied. And as we did in Maya, you can now see it's quite rough looking. And if we want to control that, we just create a range like so. We can drop that on here. And we can then do our input outputs the same as we did in Maya. And now you can see the top of the scales are quite glossy and the ridges are pretty rough looking. And you can obviously exaggerate that like that. And now this is more broken up. And this is a very basic way. And obviously then you can use all your default ways of color correcting, using color correct nodes, using occlusion mapping to create some dust or something. So this is now my occlusion that, for instance, I could now add on top of Dinosaur. We can just do an add. So this would go A over B. And then we can maybe invert this if we need to. So what is white is black and vice versa. So we switch these things up. And now we're just adding some kind of dust into the crevices of the dinosaur. Obviously you can color correct them or make them more dusty looking. And this is just a very, very quick way to break things up, and just showing you a quick way to, yeah, add interest, add textures to a model. And yeah, again, what I could do now, I could go back to my stage. I could do a layer break before. This will create new layers. So if I go into my Solaris layer view, sorry, start new layer is what I wanted to do. Start new layer. Can get rid of this. And then we can do a USD ROP and then hook this up. And now if I would save this, let's say to my material path version 2, like that, and I call this view 2. And if I now would save this to disk, I can load this same way in Maya, and then we get this kind of look in Maya. So that is kind of the interop between Houdini and Maya using Arnold. And now we will be looking at a couple more features that we can showcase in Arnold.